Hi, hi everyone. Welcome to the OLM community meeting. Today is January 14th, 2025. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully, you should be able to see today's agenda. We have a RFC, which is permission validation pre-flight check. The LEGI consensus is 15th. Is it still the LEGI consensus date or is it going to change? Taylor, Brett.
I think we're probably going to move it back just a little. We just had a meeting about it that changed a few things, so we'll probably move that back just a little. I'll adjust that soon.
Okay, so the date will change basically. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So do you okay, so this is the RFC. So please review and give feedback. And
Yeah,
then
I can give a quick summary of like what we're trying to do there.
yeah, please go ahead. Brett.
Um so basically there's one thing that's called a pre-flight check currently in our that prevents uh the reconciliation of a cluster extension right now. It's a pre-flight check to do CRD upgrade safety in it, and it's meant to intercept upgrades to the cluster extension that would break what's on the cluster, essentially. This thing we're also calling a pre-flight check is meant to look at what the permissions are required for the cluster extension to do its work and to short circuit the installation if there aren't permissions available to actually for the cluster extension to be installed or to do its work. Um, the RFC goes through and defines that in a little more detail than I just gave as an overview, but that's the basic idea. The things that we're still actively talking about on the RFC is how does that output come out of this in such a way that the when you're trying to install a cluster extension, you get all the all the permission failures in one place, and you could think about how you might automate the fixing of that, though we're not going to try and cover that in this RFC, um, though it's more broadly covered in the brief. And how Yep, that's the main focus of what we're still looking at in the RFC is how to get all the permission problems in one place.
Okay,
So, yep,
cool. Thanks for the summary, Brett.
yep.
Cool. So moving forward, we had two action items. I think it also carried from last time. I kind of forgot about it. So one is Joe, you and me we need to work on the dashboard about the relative priority of the epics. And then Camila and me actually wanted to make sure that we have epic for everything from the milestone document. Um, so I would get back to this. Sorry, I kind of lost track of this and so couldn't do it. We'll focus this before the next community meeting.
Yeah, I
We
think,
have, go ahead,
well,
Joe.
I think on the dashboard to reflect the relative priority of epics, that was a source of pain because I'm pretty sure the GitHub UI was causing problems because we had issues coming in from two different projects and we couldn't rank things up and down. But because we merged all of catalog D into operator controller and we moved all the issues into operator controller, and now in theory, hopefully we'll be able to rank everything sort of in one view. So maybe Lala, we should sort of update our action here to update our views to also only need to include stuff from operator controller now that we finished monorepo stuff upstream.
Right. I'll add a comment there. So keep on keeping the memory.
Somebody talking right now? Because
No, nobody's talking right now. Sorry.
okay.
Cool. So I'll look into this, and hopefully it will be easier now. So moving to the discussion topics, um, there is one topic. Is it Jordan who added it? Jordan, is it you or Joe? Kind of to discuss
Which topic are you talking about?
this one. Should we remove force member feature get and associate code?
Uh, that might have been me.
Oh, that's you. Okay.
Um, yeah, so it was probably a year ago or so. We, before we implemented any support for the existing channel upgrade edge for skip places, skip range, we took a shortcut and said, well, it's really easy to implement Semver over versions of bundles. So let's have a feature in OLM v1 that ignores what the channel upgrade edges are and instead just orders everything by Semver and derives upgrade edges that way. So we've still got code in operator controller that implements this feature gate. I don't think we're ever going to enable that or use it really because it ultimately the problem with it is that it ignores what is in the catalog. So my proposal is let's get rid of it.
So we
Any
this
any dissent on that?
It sounds like folks would love to approve a PR with that content.
Okay, let's do it. I'll make an issue at the very least, and if I have time, then I'll assign it to myself. Otherwise, anybody can pick it up.
okay. Move to the next one. I'm not sure if Camilla is. I think Camilla is
I'm
here. Okay.
here.
Okay. Do you want to talk about your topic, Camilla?
This one is simple for Joe actually, so we need Joe. We open a pull request which has a documentation. We remove Prometheus configuration because that was not used and it was a not a good idea promote that configuration. So we remove. When we were removing, one of the requests was let's document how to consume the metrics and let's put as an example how to integrate with Prometheus because that is a very common thing, right? Then we did the pull request with this documentation, but Joe raised some concerns, some questions. I think he wants to try to use this scenario for other, to define some standards for we discuss few things. So Joe, can you clarify for us what are your concerns? Do you remember?
Yeah, so we have a doc that says, here's our public API. And what that doc says is there's only two things that are in our public API. One is the API that shows up in the Kubernetes API server when we create our CRDs. And the other is our catalog D web server. And that's the only thing that anyone can depend on not breaking. So anything else we can rip out, replace, change, break, what have you, within reason. We wouldn't want to do that willy-nilly, but we give ourselves the latitude that if something needs to change, we can do it. So that means that our metrics server is not part of our public API. the endpoint that we configure, like the URL, not part of our public API. The service name that you would use to talk to that endpoint, not part of our public API. So like no aspect of the metrics or how you would consume them are part of our public API according to our documentation. So my concern, I think, is as soon as we document, here's how you consume the metrics, at the very least, it becomes ambiguous about whether that's part of our public API or not. Because it's like, on one hand, we have this doc that says, here's what's in the public API, everything else is not. On the other hand, we have this doc that says, here's how to do this thing. So I'm not saying we shouldn't have that. I just think we need to have a way in which we document non-public things. And we need to do that consistently, and it needs to be obvious, and we should probably put that in a place in our docs where all the other non-public things are, like stuff like that. I don't think that we should just not document how to consume metrics. I think we should do it in a way where we don't leave any room for ambiguity around the fact that this might change.
One question, like I get your point, right? You want to have if we put something in the documentation, we are committed, right? That is the point. So how
It's
we
sort of the implication. Yeah.
yeah, but of course the metrics never will be part of our API. Maybe we have other things like that as well in the future. Maybe we have things like alpha things that should be part of the API. I don't know, but okay, do you see another example for we try? I don't know if you can came with that. Another thing that should be an example as well for we trying to categorize how we could, like just to clarify, we are wanting in the documentation, the public documentation, the website, but we are wanting a way that make it clear that you can have break chains
Um,
or not.
I don't
That
know. I mean, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I'm sure there are other examples of, well, here's another example. The name of the service that we use is not a public API. The name of the deployment is not the namespace that we install stuff in. So,
the certs, the name of
right, there's a bunch of the fact that we depend on Cert Manager, right? The fact that you get Cert Manager installed when you install Operator Controller right now out of main, right? There's all these things that are like, those are not part of the public API, but yet they're there. And you could start depending on them, but you shouldn't. And we should do a good job of making it clear to people what they should not depend on. So we're going to be adding feature gates. I think it would be, I think there's more of a holistic thing for us to do here, which is like, we're going to start adding feature gates. Because we're going to start adding feature gates, we should make it possible for upstream users to deploy OLM v1 with those feature gates turned on or off as they please with a default set. If we're going to do that, then we probably need documentation about how to do that. And if we're going to have documentation about how to turn on alpha and beta feature gates, then we probably need documentation about alpha and beta features. And you see where I'm going. It's like, well, we're going to have stuff that talks about stuff that's not part of our public API, not GA.
Just more than one point before the others trying to came with the suggestions and ideas, just to think put that in another way as well. Because okay, we say the cert, a lot of things we have, the namespace is not fixed, we can change ever. But in the case of the metrics, maybe it's a little bit more complex, right? Because if I'm the admin of the solution, I install the solution, I integrate with Prometheus or whatever, I have alerts. Then I upgrade the solution and my alerts stop to work.
Totally, yeah, totally agree. So that's why we should be very clear with those people. This might break. We have not decided to put this in our public API yet.
But you
Just
never
like if someone says, I created a service monitor, well, that's using this metrics example again. Someone might say, oh, I depend on the fact that there's an OLM v1 cluster issuer because I started to make new certs using that cluster issuer. Well, you can't depend on that either. We might not have a cluster issuer anymore. We might change the name of it. That's a similar thing, right? Like someone could go and start depending on it. My thing is we have a doc that says, here's our public API that explicitly says, if it's not mentioned here, it's not public, it can change.
the last question is like just to be sure that we are all in the same page, that I understand. When we say the public API for me is the API of like the CRG, the actual API, right? The product API. The metrics never would be like API.
That we need to think of it as what things are we going to guarantee continue to work? It doesn't really matter if it's a CRD or a CLI flag or a metrics endpoint. None of that, like all of that is potential API service. Even our Go project, like we might have libraries in there that we want to say, okay, other projects can consume this library and we move it out of internal.
So
All
we
of that stuff is potential API service that we would want to say is public or not.
So we need to find a way to say in the documents, here is the things that you are committed in the breaking change policy, in the same verse policy, something like that. And here are the things that okay, you are not committed at all. Doesn't it follow that you are
I think it's going to be very difficult for us to enumerate things we're not committed to, right? Because that changes often. So here I'll link to this. Lala, if you wouldn't mind opening this page in the chat, I just put the link to the public API doc.
So, Joe, if I understand correctly, what you're kind of trying to do is to do an end run to prevent a Hiram's law situation, right?
Yeah.
Where anything that we express in any way under any context becomes part of an assumed formal API. And instead, we want to put those behind some kind of a wall that says, hey, this is not something we plan to support.
So again, I think my point is like we've got this public API doc. It's very explicit. It has the warning thing that says anything not mentioned in the above is prone to breaking changes. We've done our due diligence here to say what is and isn't in our public API. Metrics is not here. So the next bit is like if we put something in a how-to guide about our metrics, now there's ambiguity because while this says it's not in the public API, we also now have a how-to guide that says here's how to do a thing. If you don't see this public API page, it's reasonable to assume that you can depend on that because we put it in our documentation. So all I'm asking is that for things that are not in our public API or something that we don't want users to depend on, let's make sure that any documentation about that is sort of cordoned off somewhere to a place where it's clear by the time you've gotten there, you're in the breaking change area of the documentation.
Personally, I think even if you call that out, if it's not behind a feature gate that somebody has to remove, I think
It's possible, yeah, you still run into it. And I don't
yeah,
disagree. Like if we really wanted to be sticklers about this, we'd put the entire metrics endpoint behind a feature gate and then and at that point then it would be very consistent with anything else that's not GA. And we'd say, here's our list of feature gates. The feature gate is alpha. Here's what alpha means. And
right,
if you want to use this, turn the feature gate on.
right.
That's
And
not
Well, and we could also say that like once something gets to beta, we could again not make a guarantee, but it's like our intent is that this is stable and it is unlikely to
More
change.
dependable. Yeah.
Right, more depend, you know what I mean? So we could have those gradations and we could just have the docs for alpha features say, here's what it means and here's how you turn it on. Beta, here's what it means, here's how it turns on, how you turn it on. We could also have a warning mess, we could have a accept or deny message, right? When you turn on the alpha feature gate, it says, okay, this might change. Look at these docs. This is what it means. Yes, no. Something, or we could do that declaratively, obviously, too. But I just think that I think that's always going to be better. And if we organize any additional documentation around, hey, these are alpha features, these are beta features, as opposed to somebody just looking and saying, oh, metrics, I want that. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. There's an admonition that says this isn't supported, whatever. I just want metrics. That's, in my experience, that's how a lot of people read docs.
But that
Yeah.
is strange, right, Joe? Because we put like to run the stuff is required to have the certs. Okay, if you don't have the certs, don't have metrics. But yeah, we put like by default, right? The metrics as well. The metrics.
Yeah. Metrics are turned on by default. There's no way to turn them off with a metrics knob. But I think that's what Michael's suggesting is like, well, if this isn't part of our public API, maybe we should put it behind a feature gate where it's not actually turned on unless the feature gate is enabled. So that, well, and you think about it, it's like there's actually multiple layers of metrics. There's, do you serve metrics endpoint? Yes or no? And then you could imagine that in the future, like if you go look at the metrics endpoint, there's how many metrics? There's probably 300 or 400 metrics that come out, different time series. Are all of those part of that API guarantee?
No, it's from controller runtime, right? We don't
Right,
guarantee.
like if the metric names change, have we broken an API? Do we need to rev a major version? Well, if it's behind a feature gate, we wouldn't have to. But as soon as if we ever got to the point of saying, okay, metrics are GA, we probably couldn't change the time series that are coming out. Or at least we couldn't remove any. Jordan, you got your hand up.
Yeah, and I think you just at the end of that really hit where I was kind of targeting, which is while I like the idea of having this stuff behind an alpha feature gate because it explicitly communicates the absence of formal support, it also kind of implies that there is a path to its eventual maturity. And as you say, what is the level? What are the different gradations that we wish to consider that over? But also, yeah, if we do decide that this needs to go GA, then it's part of our public API now. So this gives us perhaps more nuance in how to communicate effectively that something isn't part of our formal API, but it really implies that it's on the track to becoming it.
Here's another question. Well, this is probably okay. We released 1.0.0 with our metrics endpoint turned on. But we also do have our public API doc that says it's not public. So I think we're probably okay to essentially remove it because we've at least said in text it's not public. So I think that's probably okay. I was just going to ask, like, do we even have this choice anymore? But I think we do because we have said the only things that are in our public API are these two things.
Yeah, and I think we could also frame what we're discussing here as a proposal as a way of being more explicit in the already stated goal of identifying the public APIs.
Yeah.
But the question is, Joe, why do you want to remove it? Can we, if we mark it experimental or we move it to under feature gate in future, or at least in the documentation for now, we say this is experimental it
No,
won't
I mean
change.
remove it from our default set of what runs. So if we put it behind an alpha feature gate, it would be removed by default. Anyone that wants it would have to come back in and turn that feature gate on. Technically, if our CLI and our general behavior, all of it were part of our public API, that would be a breaking change to do that. But I think we can justify it by saying, well, we've documented what our public API is. It's not that, so you don't have any guarantees that we won't do this.
Yeah, I mean, and also like I think we we I don't think anybody is using this right now. We just did a release, and I'm not expecting anybody actually started using this, and will start complaining if we move it to feature gate. So I think
Yes,
we're
but I think
pretty
that's a
safe.
very slippery slope, and we should not use that as justification.
It's not. I don't think this is a justification, but I think it's like definitely a gray area, and probably would be safe in doing that.
From a practical standpoint, I agree. From a, is it okay to make this change standpoint, whether we think someone uses it or not is
Yeah.
not. I know you're not suggesting that, so I think we're
Right.
good.
Yeah, we're fine. I mean, yeah, even if like, we recognize this is a gap which we did not realize before, so probably we're just taking action when we realized it.
Well, yeah, and I like the way that Jordan said it, which is like we're trying to be more explicit about our already stated public API so that there's even less confusion.
Right. So with respect to the PR which Camilla has, right? So do we want to put a hold on it and wait till the feature gate code is in, then basically move it to feature gate, then update the documentation, or is it okay to add experimental kind of information that, metrics is experimental in currently, and we'll update you once we have more information on this and still merge the PR.
My suggestion, I haven't looked at the PR recently. I know Michael suggested let's move it to the drafts folder. If it's targeted at the drafts folder, merge it. Like it's fine because that doesn't show up on our docs site. And that's a place for us to sort of put the like staging for all of our docs. And then at the same time, we can go and implement the feature gate for this. And then I think what we would want to do to get it out of a drafts folder is go and work with Michael to figure out, okay, we've now got a few feature gates. Let's go figure out how to document feature gated functionality in general. And then once we figured that out, now we can say, okay, and now that we've got this figured out, here's the docs for this particular feature gate.
Looks like we do not have a draft folder anymore. I think
In the docs,
It's under docs. Should be.
maybe it got removed because we don't
Yeah.
have any anymore, but we would re-add that and make sure that it doesn't show up on the site.
Yeah, so I think inside the docs there should be a draft folder and we can edit. And probably it would be worth also adding a note in the doc saying it's just experimented at this moment. The feature is experimental. That also gives more explicit information that this is not a GA feature or anything.
Yeah.
Camila, does this sound okay to you?
Yes. So just to recap, what we'll do here in this documentation, we just need to improve the warning, the notes, however, in the
We
top
need
to make
to,
it clear. We need to put in the drafts docs / drafts. And also we need a issue record to put the metrics behind a feature gate.
correct.
Yep.
And how will be the priority of this one? Should we deliver before the next release? Or since we put in the document and
I don't think this would block another release from happening. So when we get to it, we get to it.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I think that address another thing that you raised, right? That you'd like more help from Michael as well, because we are in more people. We create a lot of documents, and if we put everything in the draft first and after move for the public documentations. Should we thinking about a process like that or just for this case?
We had the draft folder before as well, Camila. So whenever like people are not very sure about, like contributors are not sure about their documentation, like this is like refined enough to move it to public documentation. We used to put it inside draft, which is fine, for long term also, like anybody wants to contribute something, but that person is not sure about whether this is good enough or just want to maybe that have initial documentation and probably need help refining it. I think it's okay to put it in draft folder. I think because it will not, hopefully it will not show up in the public documentation. So, and then somebody goes in and refines it, and then it gradually and moves it to the public documentation. So I think this is okay from a process point of view. What do you think?
Yeah. I'm guessing the only reason drafts doesn't exist is because we didn't have like a get ignore or get keep or whatever file in the drafts folder before. And whenever we went and did V1, we threw a bunch of stuff into drafts and then we managed to do a bunch of work to get it out of draft. And now there's no more drafts. So then the drafts folder went away. So I think when we go and add a new draft, we should probably also add a file in that directory that's like a template for writing a draft, like something that makes sure that that draft directory is going to stick around. But yeah, the doing the drafts is totally part of our existing process.
It probably wouldn't hurt to have like an index or a README in the draft folder that says like
Yeah.
that just for people who find documentation there that like, hey, these are work in progress drafts if you want to use this to experiment or try something, but don't use anything in production that you find in the drafts folder or some sort of thing. Just
Yeah.
Just
That's a good idea.
CYA. So we could do that, and then in early March, I have an issue to do like a docs brief, but maybe from there too, it's like I could have like a docs. I could work on having like a docs template to get started with procedures and um have in the contribution guide to sort of clarify like open your PRs against the drafts folder and at least for the community and stuff, and then we can get some folks to kind of shepherd things from um but shepherd things along to kind of get the final style and placement and formatting things. It's often easier for me to help if I can just pull things from the drafts folder and know that it's technically accurate and then kind of reformat it for consistency and style from there.
Thanks, we are discussing this one. Just more one question about the technical change, right? Because, okay, we have the flags, we have this part that is in Golang, we put behind the filter gauge. Then we have the customize that apply the files to have the metrics, right? So just to ensure that we all agree, we are in the same page, the customize by default, you'll not have the metrics. So if you want the metrics, we need to enable the option in the customize layer and also enable the feature gauge.
What's the customized bit of it, Camilla?
Just a moment, I need to check, but I'm quite sure that we have.
I would think that we would do all the normal things to deploy everything without needing any changes. And we would have a feature gate that says enable metrics handler or something like that. And if that feature gate is enabled, then we would do the extra code that actually injects that handler into the server and runs it. But otherwise, like everything else would be ready for that feature gate to be enabled.
I get. So the metric server will be disabled by default. We pass 0 for controller runtime.
Yeah, so like for example, if the only reason that we generate certs for operator controller is because we need them for the metric server, that's fine. Let's generate the certs anyway. We'll have them, they're injected, they're there. They don't get used unless you turn on the feature gate because that's the only thing they use them. Like that sort of thing would be okay in my opinion.
Okay, just for we have the details. Thank you.
Okay. So that's our discussion topics. I don't see any discussion topics here. The roadmap check-in, I'm not sure if it's worth doing because it's the epics are not arranged as per priority. So we should fix this for the next meeting, and we should be able to do a roadmap check-in. I think at least from yeah, I think we'll do it offline. And we can do a roadmap check-in next time. So that's mostly it for today's meeting. Does anyone have any other topic to talk about?
Yeah, real quickly, uh, since we seem to be at the end of everything on the agenda there, looking at you run through the roadmap there, I noticed that it's keying on the V1.x label. Um, should we update the links in the agenda so that we're looking at the one.next as well as the one.future? That is to say, like right now, the V1.1 and the V1.x.
So that should be just one release train, right? So 1.x release train, we need to remove this 1.1 label, and then it can be just 1.x, and it should be all epics for future and whatever we are considering in our release train.
All right, so anything that contributors or maintainers are working on right now as part like that right now has the 1.x label on it should have the has the 1.1 label on it currently should have a 1.x label on it instead.
Yeah, and it will remove the 1.1 label because you're not tracking by each release, right? I think we should just remove this 1.1 label. It should be just
But
1.x label.
but don't do that until you label all of those same things with 1.x, otherwise you might lose track of them.
Yeah, yeah. So that's why I added 1.x to I think everything, but I haven't removed 1.1 to make sure that I don't lose track of anything. So um, yeah, just need to make sure. And then so basically currently the version 1.1 label is going to go away. It will not stay. It will not stick around. I think that's what just confuses you, right, Jordan?
Well, actually, I was speaking specifically in the context of the epic that I've been contributing towards right now. And in November, you removed 1.x and added 1.1 as a label to that epic. So what you just said today is the reverse of that. And so I was just trying to make sure that I was understanding correctly.
So what's the current labels on it? Is it only 1.1 or 1.1 and 1.x both?
Only 1.1.
So that's why you haven't removed it. I have to make sure all the epics which is 1.1 should have 1.x labels as well. Yep, I can see that.
Right. Yeah, it sounds
1570.
like a couple of us maybe ought to take a look at them and just get
Yeah,
them aligned in that approach.
yep. Yeah, I wanted to fix
I'll
it.
definitely fix mine. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for pointing. Awesome. Thanks everyone. And I'm going to go stop the recording.